I got it somewhere back here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm going to try to reorient my talk based on the fact that you guys, usually I talk to people who think meditation is absolutely ridiculous. So my wife and I had our first child a year ago, and not long after he arrived, I found myself holding this kid, this screaming beast, and there was like poop everywhere. And I had this idea, which is that the title of my next book is going to be "Everything in My Last Book Was Bullshit." So this was not really like, for me, I came at this, this was a big surprise to me that this meditation became part of my life. And it started with a panic attack on national television, which I will show you in a minute. I brought a little video of it. It happened in the year 2004 on a little show that we do at ABC News called Good Morning America that you may have heard of. Because I'm a huge masochist, I actually asked our research department to find out how many people were watching, and they came back with the vastly reassuring number of 5.019 million. No big deal. And in this clip I'm about to show you, I give a sort of blow by blow of my on-air Waterloo, so let's see if I can make it work.
From ABC News, this is Good Morning America.
Welcome to the most embarrassing day of my life.
We're going to go down to Dan Harris. This is the news desk.
Morning, Gerald, and thank you. It's me 10 years ago, and the reason this is the most embarrassing day of my life is not that it looks like I've been attacked by a blow dryer and a can of hairspray. No, it's that I am about to freak out on national television.
Oh, we lost the audio. I can pause it and tell you what's actually happening. I think there may be that one channel is playing and the other isn't.
Yeah, it's a split, right?
Yeah, it's split.
We're only getting one side.
You know what? You guys work on it. I'll give you the blow by blow verbally and
All right.
they fix it.
Just lip sync it.
I can lip sync it, or I can reproduce it now. So I had done that a bunch of times before. I had filled in on Good Morning America many times. My job that morning was to come on and read the headlines at the top of each hour. And
One side works, but the
a couple of seconds into my shtick,
of course.
I was overtaken by this huge bolt of fear. My heart was racing, my palms were sweating, my mind was racing. We'll try it again. All right.
No. We should get you, but not her. We think we're down.
Oh,
here.
okay. All right. So
No.
stand by.
It's me 10 years ago, and the reason this is the most embarrassing day of my life is not that it looks like I've been attacked by a blow dryer and a can of hairspray. No, it's that I am about to freak out on national television. Health news now, the world's most commonly prescribed medications may be providing a big bonus. Researchers report people who take cholesterol-lowering drugs called statins for at least 5 years may also lower their risk for cancer. But it's too early to prescribe statins slowly for cancer production.
There's supposed to be something here.
Now that is for you. We go back now to Rob and Charlie.
All right, thanks very much, Dan Harris. The news desk for some of the headlines of the morning. We're going to Tony Perkins now.
Once the fear subsided, humiliation rushed in. I knew with rock solid certainty that I had just had a panic attack on national television.
Okay, that was a little funky just because for some technical reasons that I won't bore you with. But anyway, that was me having a panic attack. I get one of two responses when people see that. One response is if you've had any taste of panic, you know exactly what you're looking at. The other response I sometimes get is, oh, wasn't that bad. It doesn't really matter because I know what it was like for me and it sucked. In a weird and windy way, it ultimately led me to the thing that made me 10% happier, which we all know is meditation. I'll get to that in a second, but I want to tell you the backstory of the panic attack, which in some ways is more embarrassing. I started at ABC News when I was 28 years old. This is the picture they took of me on my first day. It's still on my ID card, even though I begged them to take it off. A friend of mine has joked that if you take a wide shot, it looks like I might be holding a balloon. I was, as I said, 28 years old, just terrified. I was working with giants in our industry like Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters, and Peter Jennings, and I was really insecure about my lack of experience, and my way of coping with that was to become a workaholic. I just threw myself into the job. And I firmly, well, I had inherited this motto from my dad, which is, the price of security is insecurity. It'll shock you to hear that my dad's a Jew. He's a doctor from Boston. Anyway, so he had bequeathed me this motto, and I believed that there was a direct relationship between the intensity of my anxiety and any success I was experiencing. So I was just on this constant thought loop of how good was my last story, what's my next story going to be, is somebody getting a story that I want, what's my relationship with the bosses right now, blah, blah, blah. And not long after I got there to ABC, 9/11 happened, and I raised my hand to go overseas to cover whatever happened next, frankly, without really thinking about what the psychological consequences might be. This is a picture of me with some nice young gentlemen from the Taliban. It's actually just a couple of weeks after 9/11, I was in Kandahar in southern Afghanistan, and this is my first experience in a war zone. And the truth is, I sort of liked it. I felt it was really important work. It was also really exciting. There's an expression from Winston Churchill that there's nothing more thrilling than the bullet that misses you. And luckily for me, the bullets missed. And so I went on after this to spend time in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza. I made 6 or 7 trips to Iraq. And when I came home after a particularly long stretch in Iraq in the summer of 2003, I got depressed. And I didn't actually even know I was depressed, although I was exhibiting what I now know to be some of the signature symptoms. I was having trouble getting out of bed. I felt like I had a low-grade fever all the time. And at this point, I made a toweringly stupid call, which is I started to self-medicate with recreational drugs, including cocaine and ecstasy. This is usually when the hush falls over the room. I hasten to add, it wasn't like that movie, The Wolf of Wall Street, or anything like that. I wasn't popping blues all the time or anything, but it was nonetheless incredibly stupid. I never did it when I was working, I never did it when I was on the air, but it was enough, according to my doctor. Well, I'll tell you what happened when I went to go see a doctor not far from here. After the panic attack, I went to see the shrink who's an expert in panic, and he asked me a bunch of questions to get to the root of the problem. And one of the questions was, do you do drugs? And I kind of sheepishly said, yeah, I do. And he leaned back in his chair and gave me a look that communicated the following sentiment. Okay, asshole, mystery solved. That was a big aha moment for me. I realized like what an idiot I'd been. So I made 2 big calls in that moment. One is I quit doing drugs, kind of a no-brainer. And 2, because quitting doing drugs is not an easy thing to do, I agreed to go see this shrink once or twice a week indefinitely. But this is not some neat and tidy little story where I, quit doing drugs and start meditating and my life is a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Something else had to happen, and it came in the form of this guy, Peter Jennings, who some of you may remember. He was really a legend in my business, and he was also my mentor. And he took me aside one day and said, you, Dan Harris, are now going to cover faith and spirituality for ABC News. And I was like, no. I don't want to do that. By way of background, I mentioned before, my dad's a doctor. Both of my parents are doctors. I was raised in the People's Republic of Massachusetts, an extremely secular environment. I did have a bar mitzvah. That's my bar mitzvah picture. Yeah. But I did that only for the money. So I had no real interest in faith and spirituality at all. Peter didn't care. He said, you're going to do it anyway. And it turned out to be great for me because I met a lot of new people that I never otherwise would have met. I spent a lot of time in mosques and megachurches and Mormon temples. I really saw how ignorant I was on this issue. And I saw the value of having a worldview that transcends your own narrow interests, which was useful for me as a young, ambitious reporter on the make. That being said, none of what I encountered spoke to me personally. I didn't go kosher or join a church or anything like that until the year 2008, when one of my producers recommended I read a book by this guy. I suspect in this crowd you will all know who this is. This is Eckhart Tolle, who is a mega best-selling self-help guru. I had never heard of him, but my producer was arguing, you cover faith and spirituality, this guy is a big deal, you should do a story on him. Apparently, she told me, Oprah loves him. Apparently Oprah put copies of his book in every bedroom in every house she owns. Paris Hilton was seen carrying one of his books into jail when she did time for DUI. So I thought, all right, sounds like weird enough for a TV story. So I ordered the book and I started to read it. And at first I thought it was, the technical term for what I thought it was is bullshit. I thought it was like incredibly hardcore bullshit, just filled with all of this grandiose language and pseudoscientific claims and overpromising about how this book is going to provoke in you, the reader, a spiritual awakening, whatever that means, and how after his own spiritual awakening he lived in a state of bliss on park benches in the city of London for 2 years.
Wow.
I'm not a meteorologist, but as far as I know, they have winter in London. So I found that claim and much of pretty much everything else he had to say dubious. But I kept reading, and I'm glad I did because he started to unfurl a thesis about the human situation that I had never heard before. Tolle's argument is that we all have a voice in our heads, by which he's not talking about schizophrenia or hearing voices. He's talking about your inner narrator, the voice that chases you out of bed in the morning and is yammering at you all day long and has you constantly wanting stuff, not wanting stuff, judging other people, comparing yourself to other people, thinking about the past or thinking about the future to the detriment of whatever's happening right now. And I have a friend named Sam Harris, who some of you may have heard of. He also writes books about meditation. He has joked that when he thinks about the voice in his head, he feels like he's been hijacked by the most boring person alive. Saying the same shit over and over. Most of it negative, and all of it self-referential. And Tolle's argument is when you're unaware of this nonstop conversation that you are having with yourself, it yanks you around. It's why you find yourself with your hand in the fridge and you're not hungry, or you're checking your email in the middle of a conversation with another human being, or you're losing your temper when it's strategically unwise. And this thesis struck me as A, intuitively true, and B, it explained the most embarrassing moment of my life. The voice in the head is why I went off to war zones without thinking about the consequences. Came home, got depressed, and was insufficiently self-aware to even know it. And then blindly self-medicated, and it all just blew up in my face. Suffice it to say, it was a little bit embarrassing to be reading a book by this guy and thinking, he gets me. But the bigger problem was not that, it was that he, as far as I could tell, didn't have any practical or actionable advice for dealing with the voice in the head. So I read the whole book. I think I read a couple of his books, and I couldn't see anything useful for dealing with the voice in the head. And so I agreed to interview him. I flew to Toronto and sat in a crappy little hotel room and interviewed Eckhart Tolle. And the first thing I did was ask him, what do you do about the voice in the head? And he took a beat and said, take one conscious breath. The voice in my head was saying, well, what the hell does that mean? And I gave him a lot of chances to answer this question. He either was unwilling or unable to do so. And things got even weirder when at one point I asked him whether he ever gets into a bad mood. I brought the answer to that. I'll see if this video works. Ready?
Don't you
somebody cuts you off in your car?
It's fine, it's like a sudden gust of wind. I don't pass them as a gust of wind. And so it's simply what is.
And you're able to enjoy every moment, even if I start asking you a ton of annoying questions.
Yes, that would be fine. So it's really
Don't tell me.
Very frustrating man. It was like, I said this in my book, it was like he had pointed out that my hair was on fire and then refused to give me a fire extinguisher. So I didn't really know what to do at this point. Again, this was all new to me. I'd never heard this idea of the voice in the head before. And so I kind of threw myself into the world of self-help, which I will spare you the time and expense, is not a pretty place and filled with a lot of people who would tell you you can solve all of your problems through the power of positive thinking, which is not going to happen. I can get on my high horse on that in the Q&A if anybody wants, but in the interest of time, I will just say I was unimpressed profoundly by what I found in self-help, and I was at kind of at wit's end, and I came home one night from work, and my then fiance and now baby mama Bianca gave me a gift. She handed me a pair of books by this guy, who will be familiar to many of you. Lives right here in New York City, often speaks right here at the Tibet House. His name is Dr. Mark Epstein. He writes books about the overlap, he's a psychiatrist. He writes books about the overlap between psychology and Buddhism. And that night as I was reading his book, I had another big aha moment. I realized that all the stuff I liked most, the stuff that was most coherent and interesting in Eckhart Tolle seemed to have been lifted largely without attribution from somebody named the Buddha. Notwithstanding the fact that I was ostensibly a religion reporter, I actually knew nothing about Buddhism, other than the fact that when I was a 15-year-old kid, I stole a Buddha statue from a local gardening store and put it in my bedroom because I thought it was statute of limitations on that has passed, I've been assured. It turns out, and many of you will know this, 2,600 years before Eckhart Tolle started cashing his royalty checks, it was this guy, the Buddha, who was talking about the voice in the head, and you will also recognize the term I'm about to use. He used a different term than voice in the head or ego. He used the term monkey mind. According to the Buddha, and again, nothing new to most of you, we are like furry little primates, just our minds are lurching through a forest of urges and impulses and desires, constantly latching onto things that will not last in a universe characterized by impermanence, and hurling ourselves from one hit of pleasant experience, one meal, one movie, one latte to the next, and never fully satisfied. My meditation teacher is a guy named Joseph Goldstein, and he likes to ask people, how many vacations, how many promotions, how many parties have you experienced, and are you done? Of course not. We're insatiable, and in this way, the pursuit of happiness becomes the source of our unhappiness. And unlike Eckhart Tolle, the Buddha had a pretty simple piece of advice for dealing with the voice in the head, which was, and everybody here knows the punchline, meditation. Which to me sounded like the worst idea in the world and utterly, utterly repellent. I was of the view that meditation was only for people who live like this, who live in Cured and are really into aromatherapy and Cat Stevens and John Tesh, and make dream catchers, put them up on the wall. No offense, I'm sure there may be a few people who make dream catchers in this very room. Who wear finger symbol. Yeah, I'm getting a nasty look over there from the dream catcher. Wear little finger symbols and use the word namaste without irony. Which I'm sure happens in this room a lot. I have a little clip of, I hesitate to show it, but I'm going to show it anyway. This is what Alec Baldwin's character on 30 Rock said about meditation, which resonated with me at the time.
Meditation is a waste of time when French or kissing everything.
Oh, he says kissing after sex. I don't espouse that view. It's just a funny clip. So I was, as I think I've established, pretty skeptical. But then I started hearing about the scientific research. Again, a lot of you guys. This is a talk generally aimed at skeptics and ignoramuses. We don't have any really in the room, but you guys will all be well aware of the explosion of scientific research that's grown up around meditation in the last 10, 15 years. This is something that doesn't get said frequently enough. This research is still in its early stages and at times in real danger of being overhyped. That being said, what I found as I started to do some research is that even though it's in its early stages, the meditation research strongly suggests a long list of really tantalizing health benefits, like lowering your stress hormone, release of stress hormones, lowering your blood pressure, boosting your immune system, where the research is the strongest around depression and anxiety. It's also been shown to help with ADHD, age-related cognitive decline, and in even seemingly unrelated things like irritable bowel syndrome and psoriasis. And things get truly sci-fi when we start talking about the neuroscience. This is a face that a lot of people recognize, Mathieu Ricard. In recent years, scientists have been peering directly into the brains of meditators like Mr. Ricard, and they're finding that when you meditate, you're in essence kind of performing a sort of neurosurgery on yourself. And it's not just experienced meditators or people who wear robes, it's the rest of us. There was a study done at Harvard in 2011 that took people who had never meditated before, and they scanned their brains, and then they had them do 8 weeks of just a little bit of meditation every day, and at the end of the 8 weeks, they scanned their brains again. And they found that the area of the brain associated with self-awareness and compassion, those two areas, the gray matter literally grew. And in the area of the brain associated with stress, the gray matter literally shrank. Which is really compelling stuff, especially again for a skeptic. This kind of sciencey stuff is super powerful. The more I go out and talk about meditation, the more I see that. The other thing I learned that allowed me to kind of dive into this is that meditation does not involve joining a group, although many in this room have. And you don't have to believe in anything. You don't have to wear special outfits. As I like to point out, you don't have to sit in a funny position. This is one of our cats, Ruby. The woman who took this picture, whose name rhymes with Shmiyanka, does not like when I point out that this cat is basking in the reflective glow of the Real Housewives of New Jersey. You don't have to sit in a funny position. It is simple, secular, and scientifically validated exercise for your brain. I usually run through the 3 steps on how to meditate, but I don't think I really have to do that in this room unless anybody wants me to. Yeah, I'll do it anyway. Meditation is a little bit, the word is a little bit like the word sports. It can describe a whole range of activities. But the kind of meditation that I got into is called Mindfulness Meditation, which is the kind that's been studied the most in the labs and has been thoroughly secularized. It is derived from Buddhism, but all of the metaphysical and esoteric claims have been stripped out of it, and it's really just brought down to this very simple 3-step, at least for beginners, 3-step process. The first is to sit with your back straight and your eyes closed. So some people keep their eyes open. The second is to try to feel the breath coming in and out, to bring your full attention to the feeling of your breath. Usually you pick one spot where it's most prominent, your nose or your chest or your belly. Just feel your breath coming in, going out. The third step is the key. Again, this will be familiar to a lot of people in this room. But no matter how many times I hear it, it is worthwhile hearing. It's like the opposite of the airplane safety instructions that you can just tune out safely. Meditation instructions, no matter how simple they are, we just need to have them hammered into our head. So the third step bears repeating for even the most experienced meditators, which is it doesn't matter how many times you get distracted. You are going to get distracted a million times. As soon as you try to focus on one thing, like your breath, your mind's going to go crazy. You're going to start thinking about what am I going to have for lunch? Why did I say that dumb thing to my boss? Why did Dances with Wolves beat Goodfellas for Best Picture in 1991? Whatever. Still burning about that one. The whole game is to notice when you've become lost and to start again and again and again and again. One of the biggest PR problems for meditation right now, aside from the whole hippie thing, which I think science is really helping us with, is that people think they can't do it because it involves clearing the mind. So this is a notion that I have to disabuse people of all the time. You won't be clearing your mind until you're either enlightened or dead. The point is not to clear the mind or to stop thinking entirely and indefinitely. The point is to focus the mind for nanoseconds at a time, and to notice when you've become lost and to start over again and again and again. And that is the bicep curl for the brain, which shows up on the brain scans. So after I learned all that, I started to do it for 5 minutes a day. This is a picture that Shriyanka took of me while we were on vacation with some opportunistic chickens trying to bum rush me. And I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't like meditation. It's still tough. I think, just go back to the PR problem that meditation has. I think it kind of goes back to pictures like this. I was happy the Time magazine did a big cover article about meditation. I was unhappy, however, for two reasons about the way they portrayed it on the cover. One, not everybody who meditates is an upper middle class blonde person. This was invented by an Indian or Nepali guy 2,600 years ago, and before that, thousands of years before that, other folks in India were doing this. So I thought this sent the wrong message on us from a socioeconomic standpoint. But more importantly, it sent the message that you're going to float off into cosmic ooze and become perpetually imperturbable as soon as you try to meditate. But that is not the experience, the lived experience of anybody who's tried to meditate even once. I think this is a better artistic rendering of the experience. I wanted this to be the cover of my book, but they said it was too artsy. So I started to do it, and I very quickly found that there were two big benefits for me. One was that it helped my ability to focus. I work in a really high-stress job where I literally have other people's voices piped into my head, and I have to get it right on short notice in front of a lot of people. And I found that the daily exercise of sitting, trying to focus on one thing at a time, getting lost, starting over, getting lost, starting over, really helped me stay on point in a chaotic environment. But the bigger benefit was this word that, again, will be super familiar to this audience, is largely unfamiliar to many of the audiences to whom I speak, but mindfulness, which, as we all know, or many of us know, is an ancient Buddhist term, really, in my view, one of a few sort of special sauces that the Buddha added to the contemplative world. And there are lots of definitions for it. It's a really rich term, but I think that the most useful definition for a beginner is mindfulness is the ability to see what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. It's the ability to view the contents of your consciousness with some non-judgmental remove so that you don't necessarily take the bait and act on it. So I'll just as an absurd example, you're standing in line at Starbucks and somebody cuts you off. Generally speaking, how does that moment go for you? I think for most of us it goes like this. We have an uninvited thought, which is, who the hell is this? I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You automatically, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your response to it. With mindfulness on board, with the self-awareness that is generated through meditation, you might have that moment might go slightly differently. You might notice when you get cut off that your chest is buzzing, your ears are turning red, you're having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, you're getting angry, but you don't have to necessarily take the bait and act on it. It's a little bit like the picture-in-picture feature on your television, where you press a button and all of a sudden the story that was taking up the full frame can be seen with a little bit of perspective. The other way I think about it, and this is a John Kabat-Zinn thing, it's like if you think about the mind like a water. By the way, the reason why this looks like shit is that I drew it. If you think about the mind like a waterfall, the water is our nonstop stream of consciousness, mostly me thoughts. Mindfulness is the area behind the waterfall that to repeat a phrase, allows you to sort of step out of the traffic and view what's happening in your head with some non-judgmental remove. And just in case you think I'm making this up, we are classified as a species as Homo sapiens sapiens, the one who thinks and knows he or she thinks. But that second sapiens has been atrophied over time because nobody bothers to point out to us that we have this innate capacity to see our, again, the contents of our consciousness without necessarily diving in and getting carried away by the stream. Just back to the Starbucks example for a second. A lot of the type A striver folks who I talk to, I think, often get a little nervous at first when mindfulness is brought up because they think, well, am I not justified in getting pissed sometimes? The proposition here is not that you should be rendered into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The Buddha was a very active person in the world, and if you read the scriptures, he often had sharp words for people with whom he disagreed. So the proposition is that isn't that you should become a palooka all of a sudden. The idea is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen instead of reacting blindly. Most meditation cliches make me want to put a pencil through my eye, but this one, respond, not react, is a game changer. This is the whole thing, especially for a beginner. And I think when put that way, it becomes a very attractive idea to people, which is why we're now seeing meditation taking off in some really surprising places. Google, Procter & Gamble, Aetna, Target, General Mills. General Mills, these are the people who make Hamburger Helper, and they now have meditation rooms in every building on their corporate campus in Minnetonka, Minnesota. It's also taken off in a big way in the tech world. This is an article from Wired magazine where they refer to meditation and mindfulness as Silicon Valley's quote-unquote new caffeine. I find it massively ironic that the people who are developing the products that are destroying our ability to focus are embracing this ancient technique to improve their own, but I think it should be something that we should be paying attention to. It's also taking off in the sports world. This is the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks who, yes, did lose to my hometown cheaters, the Patriots, last year, but are nonetheless a very good team. And Novak Djokovic is doing it. The New York Knicks, who suck right now but may not in the near future, they also actively meditate because Phil Jackson is their general manager, who used meditation with the Lakers and the Bulls to pretty positive effect. It's also taking off in the entertainment world. This is the lead singer of Weezer. Katy Perry meditates. 50 Cent. That dude got shot 9 times. I believe he deserves a little peace of mind, so I was happy to hear he meditated. Most intriguingly, from my point of view, and this may be controversial in this room, the military has been adopting meditation, really spending tens of millions of dollars to research whether meditation can make more effective, less reactive troops in the field, and more resilient warriors when they come home, less prone to the scourge of PTSD. So I'm almost done, and we can do any questions and set you underway, but before I go, I want to make a prediction, which is, actually before I make a prediction, I want to issue a caveat, which is that historically speaking, my powers of prognostication are pretty weak. In the early 2000s, I convinced my brother to invest in a company that makes the Palm Pilot. Did not go super well. That being said, I really think that meditation is the next big public health revolution. I think in the not too distant future, we're going to think about mental exercise the way we now think about physical exercise. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they probably would have said, who's chasing you? And then what happened? The scientists swooped in, they showed all the benefits of physical exercise, and now we all do it, and if we don't do it, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're heading with meditation. That being said, and to blatantly plug my book, the reason why I called it 10% Happier is because can't pitch this as something that's going to solve all of your problems. I've learned the hard way that it's not going to make you taller or regrow the hair in the back of your head. In many ways, I'm still the same guy I was back from that picture where I was holding a balloon. I'm still super ambitious, but I've found that meditation has really helped me in many ways. Like draw, I still think that in order to succeed, you have to do a certain amount of plotting and planning and stressing. But meditation really helped me draw the line between what I call useless rumination and what I call constructive anguish. And that has made a huge difference for me. That being said, if my wife was here, she would give you the 90% still a moron speech. And my little brother, the one who I convinced to invest in the Palm Pilot, has argued that the title for the book should be From Deeply Flawed to Merely Flawed. So I'll just leave you with my little message to skeptics, which is if it can work for a fidgety newsman, it can work for you. Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to take questions. Sir?
Thanks for your presentation. It was great. And I read your book as well. I loved your sort of. I love that you were always searching for the practical application of this, right? You're always challenging these sort of folks to, well, how does this help them? And how do I actually apply this? And how does it help me get rid of the voice in my head? And which resonated with me. And I actually had a similar, there's a question here, I'll get to it.
We're not in a rush, man. Go ahead.
Okay.
Hold for it.
So I had a very similar experience that you had. I spent my life like an outgoing guy and be the jokester at the party, and then one day I had this sort of presentation at school in college, and I had this horrible, overwhelming sort of panic experience that I could even see it in your video, I couldn't even get the words out because my heart was racing and I was shortness of breath and all these sorts of things, and after that experience I kept having the fear that was going to happen again, and that was almost worse than the actual panic attack that would cause them, because I was always so worried. So long story short, I actually I've done a lot. I mean, I take medication for it and all this sort of stuff, but I want to try this. So I'm new to this whole thing. I read your book and that's it. I just don't know, and I started a little bit. I downloaded this app called Headspace, I think it's called, and I just don't know. How do you know? I guess to the question is, how do you know if it's working? How do you know if it's working? How do you know that this is something that's actually doing something?
So
that's probably a hard question.
That's a great question, and it's the question for beginning meditators. So the question that beginning meditators have is, actually they have a million questions, but they're all, in my experience, a permutation of one question, which is, am I doing it right? And just on the app issue, Headspace is great. There's another new app that's phenomenal. It's called 10% Happier. I'm slightly partial to the latter. It's me and a bunch of the teachers that will be familiar to the people in this room, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, and people from that lineage teaching basic meditation and then beyond. Having said that, I ask Joseph, who's my teacher all the time, how do I know if I'm doing it right? And generally, the answer is, are you aware of what's happening right now? Like while you're meditating? Some percentage of the time. And then when you lose it, do you start again? Then you're doing it right.
Then you're doing it right.
Yeah. It's not much more complicated than that. We make it complicated. I make it complicated. I'm constantly 6 years in, which is nothing compared to most of my Dharma friends. But 6 years in, I'm constantly obsessing over whether I'm doing it right. It is completely natural. It's helpful in those moments to just make a note. For me, it's been helpful in those moments to just note to myself, oh, I'm engaged in self-doubt. That's what it is. And what you're doing is taking, again, it's the picture-in-picture thing. You're taking this story that's taken up the whole frame and you're putting it in a little box and objectifying it, making, instead of having it be totally subjective. And then it sort of loses a lot of its teeth. And you have to do that a million times because it keeps coming back. The doubt, or the anger, or the discomfort, or whatever it is. The point is, over time, these things stop having so much power over you. So for me, I started to feel some benefit within a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. And the first sign that it was working was when I started to hear my wife overhear her at parties saying to people, "Oh yeah, he's less of an asshole." Okay, so something is working here. And that other people in your life will notice it first, is generally my experience. Over time, what you'll notice is that, and this is a phrase that I'm borrowing from my friend Sam, the half-life of your anger will go down dramatically. And the difference, and again, I'm still borrowing from Sam here, the difference between the type of damage you can do in 2 minutes of anger and an hour of anger is incalculable. And that is where the rubber hits the road. And it takes time. You know, the 10% thing is a complete joke. Obviously, you can't quantify happiness, but it's close enough. And it's 10% that compounds annually.
Can you drive on the FDR and gridlock and not scream like that? Like
some days I'm gonna I don't feel good today. I have a cold,
Right.
And I had a meeting this morning that was completely unnecessary and blah blah blah. So I was like in a bad mood.
Yeah.
So yeah, I still get into bad moods, but again, it's about the half-life of the anger. You aren't going to necessarily, at least for beginning meditators. I mean, the proposition of the Buddha is that you can purify the mind of all negative emotions, but that's for a fully enlightened being. I'm not sure I believe that. I haven't experienced it personally. But for beginning meditators, which I consider myself to be, the point is that you won't necessarily change the type of thoughts and emotions you experience. You will change your relationship to them. That's the judo move. The anger will still come up, but there's nobody necessarily there to take delivery of the package. And that is huge. It is huge. Sometimes you take delivery of the package and act like a shithead, and then what you might find, and this has been the case for me, is that the apologies come quicker. I know sooner. You know what's really put me in touch with a brilliant expression from Abraham Lincoln, who said, "When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion." Pretty good religion. And mindfulness, or the self-awareness, whatever you want to call it, really brings that into stark relief in your life.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Sir, guy in the hat, and then the guy in the blue shirt.
How do you not stop? Most of us are lazy, give up, we do 2 steps forward, realize it's a good day, and go back to sleep. What made you persist?
Motivation is an interesting thing. So I don't think motivation is ever really, motivation is a huge issue in Dharma, of course. The Buddha talked a lot about it, linked to karma, of course. But I don't, from my case, when I look at why I do something or don't do something, it's always sort of mixed. So, and it's usually a range of sort of high-minded to super crass. So the high-minded side is I started, I really saw that I think I was behaving better and feeling better. So it was a little bit like exercise in that way. I've been pretty disciplined about exercise because it, staves off depression, it makes me feel better, look better. I work on TV, I'm confronted with my own face all the time, so it helps to exercise because then your face is less puffy, et cetera, et cetera. So with meditation, I can see the benefits in my own life. But also, I knew very early on that I was going to write a book. I had this sort of entrepreneurial itch that when I started to read about meditation early on, I noticed that a lot of the books, if not all the books, were very annoying. And I thought there was an opening in the market for somebody who swears a lot is kind of brutally honest and blah, blah, blah. So it was, if I was going to do this book, I'm comfortable being a hypocrite on some level, but I'm not comfortable with that level of hypocrisy to be like a public evangelist for meditation who doesn't meditate. But the core question you're asking is how do you stick with it? And so my advice would be, and this is what's worked for me, is to set, first of all, a very reasonable goal, a daily goal. I recommend 5 to 10 minutes. Scientists have not figured out the dosage question. It is the question everybody has, which is, how little can I do to derive the aforementioned benefit? It's a totally fair question. So I've run this by a lot of teachers and a lot of scientists, and I've got a pretty good level of agreement that 5 to 10 minutes is a great way to start, and if you did that in perpetuity, you would derive a lot of the benefits, if not all. But here's the asterisk that I think is let me put 2 asterisks on this. One is, I think dailiness is a huge thing. It's that daily collision with the asshole in your head that helps you stave off the shitty suggestions that is basically its job to offer up. So it helps you, not eat the 18th cookie or not say the thing that's going to ruin the next 48 hours of your marriage. The other asterisk is, and this is a great way to ensure that you stay on the wagon, because what I find is that a lot of people get really excited about meditation, just as you said. They say, I'm going to do it, and then they go a couple days without doing it, and they tell themselves this big story that they believe that I'm a failed meditator. And then that narrative takes hold, and you're walking around with that story stuck in your head. So what I would say to get around that is, on crazy days, just do something. 30 seconds, 1 minute, just do something. And then you always have your foot still in the game. So for me, that has really worked. So I have my daily goal, but some days in my life are nuts. I have a baby, I've got a job, I write books, I give talks all the time, starting a company with this app. I have a pretty busy schedule. So some days I can't do my full complement, and so I just do something. And then I don't get into this downward spiral of, woe is me, I'm a failed meditator, blah, blah, blah. I'll come to you after this gentleman right here.
Yes, you started with the video of your attack on TV, and I was wondering if that was an isolated incident, and if not, I was curious if you could speak a little bit more to, I understand that you're saying as you meditated, you got gradually, I guess, more accustomed to it, a greater sense of well-being. But in terms of applying it to a specific moment, kind of acute, say, anxiety, and was there kind of like a feedback loop where you would apply it at that moment and then have not as high a spike, and then it would gradually lower over time? I'm just kind of curious.
It's a great question, and it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it because I want to clarify. I don't think meditation is something that can be used to address a panic attack in the moment of a panic attack. Let me say a couple things about this. The reason why my panic attack situation is largely under control now is not that I'm a meditator, it's that I don't do cocaine anymore. So let's get that out there. And I always tell people, this isn't cocaine, but if you're going to speak publicly, don't drink coffee. But these things just make us more likely to have panic attacks. Panic is really powerful. Anybody who's tasted it knows. I don't think it's the type of thing that when you start to panic, you just throw yourself into the lotus position and you're just fended off. It's too much to ask. However, what we do know about panic, at least as my doctors explained to me, is that the best way to prevent it is to treat yourself. I talk about this in the book. He used an animal analogy with me to explain how I needed to treat myself very well in order to stave off panic attacks. And I remember later I came back to him and I said, remember that time you said I need to treat myself like a stallion? And he said, no. I said, thoroughbred. Irish stallion. Thoroughbreds are really finicky, they need a lot of care and feeding, and I think we do too, especially if we are prone to panic attacks. So getting enough sleep, exercise, and meditation and not caffeinating and eating well and all that stuff, they're really good ways to stave it off. But I think to expect that there's something you can do in the moment other than popping an Ativan is, I think, a little too much to put on this practice, especially, again, for beginners. Sure.
So you would equate then Dan Harris,
I know, when somebody uses my full name, I'm in trouble.
meditation with mindfulness, okay, which is to say, presence of mind, being conscious, okay, bringing your conscious.
You know what, just because I'm not sure people, this is gonna be a really good question, so I wanna make sure that the people in the back have heard it.
Yes.
You start again.
Okay, how am I doing?
You're doing awesome.
Okay, meditation, Dan Harris, we would equate with a certain mindfulness, which is to say a presence of mind, being conscious of your thoughts as they occur in the meditative state, and more or less focusing on the breath, not obsessing with those negative ideas. But it seems that you can actually expand this idea of mindfulness and presence of mind increasingly into your everyday human experience. That it doesn't have to be confined to the meditation, you can extend it throughout the day.
Amen. Amen. Do you want me to expand on
I agree
that?
with that, actually.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's what one of my healers teaches me. It's an active, over time, it's an active meditation.
I agree with both of you. So the point of exercise is so that you're stronger in the rest of your life, right? It's not just about like how you're doing spin class. It's like you should feel good all the time because you've exercised. And so the same thing with mental exercise. You know, the point is, yes, I hope you have a good on the cushion experience, but I also hope it makes you less of an asshole the rest of your life. I also hope that it makes you better at paying attention. I hope that it makes you less reactive to your negative emotions and urges. That is the point, and you can use it all day long, and you can be practicing all day long. I think that is where I certainly am trying to have in my practice, you know, to walking in between meetings instead of compulsively checking my email, which I still do, maybe feeling my legs moving or my feet on the ground. You can do it in conversations where you're actually listening to what somebody's saying instead of like planning your witty rejoinder, blah, blah, blah.
Not to slip into an unconscious state.
Yeah, yes. Which we're sleepwalking all the time, and so we just need to be jarred out of it. Over time, you know, one of the, I said before that mindfulness is a word with many definitions, and again, to the Buddhists in the room, you will know this, so I don't mean to be, I'm not a teacher, I don't mean to be pedantic, but it's one of the translations of the word sati, which is the original Pali word for meditation, is remembering. And one of the things you learn how to do the more you meditate is to remember to come back to what's happening right now instead of walking around this fog of rumination and projection in which we live most of our lives. And that is, again, one of the, I would say that's not something that starts to happen in the first couple of weeks of meditating, but in my experience in the first couple of years, that really starts to happen, and it's great.
Something to strive for.
Something to strive for, yes. Except for striving in and of itself can be a problem. Yes, sir. Every question's been from a dude, right?
Okay, is this on?
Patriarchal Buddhist community.
So, just your comment about, you think this is going to become a big public health thing, and, you know, but I guess you could say the same thing about exercise, but are you concerned, particularly in your exploration, your reporting, I'm sure you've seen a lot more than I have, about sort of pseudoscience and, you know, and what would be the, you know, what are some of the downsides when we hear, you know, the word karma is everywhere, you know, and generally being misused if you've got any training at all. So what are you concerned about the downside and how this can be abused and misused?
Yes, to all of that. So first of all, in the pseudoscience, absolutely, a lot of the studies that have been done aren't so good. And as I said early on, I mean, I'm worried that meditation science overall is being overhyped, and that as a consequence, we will see unnecessary skepticism about the practice because they'll say it's been oversold. So yes on that. And then in terms of the downsides of meditation, they are there. And I just having lunch a couple days ago with a very prominent neuroscientist from Brown University who's been looking into the fact that you can go crazy if you do a lot. It's probably not a problem for, again, for beginning meditators or just doing just a little bit, but if you start doing hours and hours a day, you're rewriting the software while the computer is running, as a friend of mine likes to say. However, this is not, and this is even the view of the experts on this, it's not incredibly common that you run into profound problems with meditation. It does happen. Teachers and mental health professionals need to be aware. The infrastructure needs to be built, and those who evangelize on behalf of this practice need to be open about it. You can't hide it. Tough stuff may come up. If you've got trauma in your life, it's going to come up. It's just the same thing with physical exercise. You can get injured, and you just need to be honest about it. Because hiding it doesn't do any good. But it also doesn't mean that the practice in and of itself isn't extraordinarily useful.
Hello,
Female
I have a
question,
question
nice.
for you. First of all, I love Peter Jennings, and I think many of us did respect him very much. He saw in you something when he said that you are going to be in journalism for faith and spirituality. What have you done to lead in that regard for the world?
What have I done to lead in the terms of faith and spirituality? Frankly, not that much other than write this book. I've definitely done a lot of work in the field, but I wouldn't consider myself the best religion reporter in the world. There are many others to whom I look up. In the New York Times, especially, they do great faith reporting. There are folks at 60 Minutes who've done great stuff. I have tried to the best of my ability to use my megaphone to do two things. Before I discovered meditation, primarily I was focused on getting accurate information out about what faiths actually believe and what people actually believe, so that, especially because I was beginning my religion coverage and doing a little bit of culture wars in 2004, so I spent a lot of time with evangelicals trying to understand as a non-evangelical what it is they actually believe and to try to clearly explicate that, to be as kind of a voice of maybe slight reduction in the hysteria. So that was a big focus for me. And now really I use the pedestal that I'm blessed to have to talk about this form of mental exercise that you can do that doesn't necessarily, can be religious, can be Buddhist, if you think of Buddhism as a religion, which I actually don't. But it also could be completely secular. And so I've really tried to use that to get that public health message out. But I don't consider myself to be like the world's leading religion reporter. I don't know what Peter would think of the book. I'd be interested to see. He's pretty tough.
No, that was why I asked the question, and I wasn't trying to put you on the spot.
I don't know.
It's just, the second question I was asked, when you say 10% happier, when you reflect back on the time you published the book to now, do you think you are 10% happier?
I go back to what I said about the compounding
Is the answer
interest.
yes or no?
The answer is yes and probably a lot more. But I would say, actually that leads me to, so this is the picture of the baby we had. And then after we had this baby who just turned 1, somebody made this. I think there was a question in the back here. Yes? That will get to you, yes.
Being that you cover different religions, I'm wondering if there's room for you to investigate meditation across religions, like Sufism and Islam.
Yeah. I'm nodding my head because that's actually kind of what I'm doing now. I'm really interested in first of all, it's just indisputably true that while we think of as Buddhism, we think of meditation as kind of a Buddhist Hindu thing. It's been part of the mystical traditions and the Abrahamic faiths for millennia. Sufi Islam, Meister Eckhart in Christianity, Judaism has Kabbalah, and so there's this kind of contemplative work has been done in lots of religions. And what's interesting is that there's an enormous amount of overlap in terms of like the goals of the practice in each of these traditions. So I'm really interested in that. There's a great book by my friend Daniel Goleman, who wrote Emotional Intelligence, he wrote a book about, it's called The Meditative Mind, and it really just tracks what enlightenment is in each of these, what the goal of the practice is in each of these traditions and how similar they are. It really is about, in many cases, about transcending the ego. So it's a big yes to your question.
Thank you. And I look forward to seeing your work.
It may be a while.
Yeah.
There's a young woman here.
Thank you for writing the book. I think it's really important that people who are in mainstream media or in the business world that could not be seen as someone who would meditate, bring this to the forefront. And I completely agree with you. I think we're on the cusp of beginning a movement around meditation today. You mentioned Aetna was up on screen. General Mills, shocking, quite frankly. I was just curious if anything was coming out of Aetna around covering this from a healthcare perspective,
Right.
encouraging this from a healthcare perspective. I mean, I certainly, take accountability for my own health and drive the doctors in conventional medicine where I want them to go. They are not driving at all. And I get as much as I can covered through like a flexible spending plan, with forcing them to write a doctor's note because it's been prescribed to me for, let's say, an energy dealer that I want to see or nutritionist that I want to see. I'm just curious if you had heard anything from the healthcare community on this.
So the CEO of Aetna is a really interesting guy who nearly died in a skiing accident and was kind of completely addled with painkillers for a long time. It was just chronic pain. He could only manage through these painkillers that were, making his thought process muddy. And the thing that really saved him was yoga. And he is now very actively encouraging his staff to do yoga and meditation. Don't know yet where he is in terms of covering that for employers, because it's my understanding the way the insurance market works is that really the employers decide what they want to cover. And I'm not an expert in this, but a lot of it comes from the demand side is on what the employers want to pay for. So I don't know where that is, but we are seeing a lot of employers now offer it. It is not, and this is cool, a high-cost proposition. So it's not like going to get an MRI, which costs you $1,000. Going to a meditation class should be cheap or free. And so I think that's why we're seeing a lot of employers offer to their employees. Whether it starts to be covered by health insurance is an interesting question, and how much that will cost, I suspect not that much.
I think to meditate, certainly basic meditation, if you're starting out, I need to also get a link on Facebook or something for your app so I can share it. I share Headspace a lot with people. It's a great way to start.
Yeah, it is a great way to start.
And, yes, I mean, the basics are really easy and certainly cheap. Should be free, I think, to everyone. Should be taught in school, should be taught from birth. But if you want to go deeper, I mean, in terms of using sound or healing or colors and light and understanding the chakra system, getting deeper into your own blocks and patterns that you're trying to unblock through the process, I do think that it's important to have a guide.
Yeah, that's true.
And those things are, and a guide that appeals to you. And those things are not necessarily inexpensive.
That's a very good point. And so I don't know where we are in terms of covering that, but I take the point.
Oh, I did have one other question, I'm sorry. Have you tried using any I am affirmations to, and seen things come into fruition as a result of what you've been putting out there in your meditation? Or?
No. Behind you, yes, yeah.
Hello. I enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much. That was very interesting to me because I'm a hypnotherapist, and then I'm interested in this how meditation works on the stress level, lowering stress level. And then I just got interested in the scientific background of that. Actually, in hypnotherapy, like you said that, in consciousness, we're using only 5% of your brains, and then in hypnotherapy, you're using up to 95% of your brain. So that's why you're at the maximum level of your capacity to solve your issues. I help a lot of panic attack clients too. I hope you try that. Maybe then you wouldn't have written this book, so maybe it's not good. But anyway, so I am interested in this because maybe it's similar type of theory going on, the background of this meditation and then hypnotherapy, maximizing that brain capacity level up to 90%. So our brain never forgets anything. So it's up here, everything. But you cannot reach there because you have only 5% of your capacity in conscious. But in subconscious, which is a hypnotized state, you have 95% of the capacity, so then you can reach a lot of memories. So that's why you can remember, you can retrieve a lot of memories too. So I was just wondering, if you know some, scientific background of this meditation, how that works on the stress, because I was here, so then maybe you spoke about it already.
I don't. I'm fascinated by it. I do think there's, the mind is an interesting place, and there's got to be some connection there, but I'm hesitant to say much because I'm aware of my profound ignorance on this subject. But you're onto something for sure. There was a woman right there. That'll get to you, sir.
Hi. Thank you for speaking to me. So I'm very guilty of trying meditation, then I've done the headspace, and I feel like it talks too much. And then I have friends in the city that, then there's silent meditation, where you just sit and breathe, and then there's other types of meditation. Another friend goes to someone and they paid $3,000 and they give them a mantra. So there's so much that I can't say, because not that I'm a skeptic, I believe it, but I can't commit to it, because it's getting to a space where it's oh, you can just do this. Oh no, but pay me $3,000 and I'm gonna give you this mantra that just belongs to you. You become very big and I'm that's just, oh, I feel so much better. Do you really? So I'm at a point, I know everyone's gonna have their own type of meditation that helps them, like silent, guided mantra. What type of meditation do you do, and do you believe in all the other stuff, and also paying to get, a mantra and someone kind of guiding you in that way?
Yeah, so I can only speak from my personal experience, so you should take whatever I say with a grain of salt. My personal experience is that there are so many options out there, it can be dizzying, and so I sympathize. And I think it might make sense to just pick one school or approach and try it for a while, maybe a couple of years, and really get grounded in that. And then it's a little bit like art. So you see these crazy modern artists, they're doing this really wild stuff, but they have a training in fundamental training in the basics of art and theory. And I think it can be useful to start with one thing, so you don't get confused and spend so much time comparing the various practices and generating a lot of doubt about, am I doing the right one, and what was the instruction again, blah, blah, blah. So, but once you pick one, so for example, if you pick what I do is sort of Buddhist-derived, actually, let's be honest, I'm a Buddhist, right? So I practice Buddhist meditation, but mindfulness meditation is derived from Buddhism and completely secular, and it's basically what you're going to get from Headspace or 10% Happier or any of these apps, and what you'll get from if you come here to see Sharon Salzberg teach, or you go to New York Insight. That is usually what's on offer. Within that, though, there's a pretty nice variety that should check your box for wanting to look around a little bit. So sometimes a guided meditation is very useful, but sometimes you don't need the guidance. So me, 6 again, 6 years in, sometimes I'll listen to my teacher guiding me in a meditation, but some other days I'll do silent. Some days I'll do straight up breath-focused meditation. Some days I'll do an open awareness where I'm just trying to focus on whatever is coming up. Other days I'll do compassion meditation. But these are all within one school. So I'm pretty confident about what I'm doing, and therefore I'm not like wondering whether I should be doing TM or should I be doing Tibetan or whatever. Not that I don't think they're useful. It's just that I've made a choice, and for now this is what I'm doing. But I'm completely open to exploring other things, especially now that I have sort of a firm grounding. When you're talking about the $3,000, I actually believe it's like $2,000. I think you're referring, I believe, to TM.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never done TM, so I won't comment on the money, except to say that I do believe the practice itself is an ancient practice. It's basically a Hindu meditation. And mantra meditation, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest, is really good for you. So I think whatever you pick, you'll find a lot of benefit from, but I think it might behoove you to just pick. Sir?
Thanks for being here while you're ill. It's appreciated.
Yeah,
I have a technical question about your app. I have it. I use it. I find it very useful. Thanks for the microphone.
Thanks for using it.
But the question I have is, there has to be a level of connectivity with the app. You must be connected to the web. You have to have a cellular connection. And though I'm very thankful for the lifelong membership through Change Collective, is there ever going to be an opportunity to download some of these guided meditations so that I could use them, say, on the subway here in the city?
That's a great question. I wish I had a good answer, but my goal would be yes, because I think as somebody who uses guided meditations, I find it very annoying when I can't get them. Like there's one that's only available online that I listen to a lot, and sometimes go on a plane, I don't have Wi-Fi, I can't use it. So yes, I think we absolutely should do that. You should have an option to download, now I'm just freelancing, but we're just at the beginning of building this company, so hearing little tweaks like that is extremely useful for me. You should have the option to like download single meditations so you're not like overloading your phone, but whatever you want, you should be able to download to your phone and just listen to anytime.
Agree. I recommend it. It's fantastic.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. There's a gentleman behind you with a question.
I'm just reading sort of some of the language in the title of your book, and the one sort of sentence that struck me is, without losing my edge. Now the question I have is that, are you addressing a general misconception regarding meditation that you may lose your edge? Or is that a potential risk?
Both. I'm doing a lot of yes ands tonight, but so it really is. So it is a misconception, and I was saying this a little bit before, and I'll amplify the point. Mindfulness is not about just sort of letting people punch you in the face and not reacting. It's about just having a buffer between the stimuli in your life and your reactions to them. So it's about learning how to respond wisely, generating the ability to respond wisely instead of reacting blindly. And that doesn't make you less effective, it makes you more effective. That doesn't reduce your edge, it boosts your edge. It is an edge, a competitive advantage to be the calmest person in the room in a hectic meeting. It is an advantage to be able to deal with your colleagues, bosses, co-workers, direct reports without flying off the handle at the slightest provocation. However, and I describe an incident in my book where there are cul-de-sacs here, there are wrong turns you can make and get stuck and lapse into resignation, passivity. But that is, and I've done this, and I walk you through a case study of my failure on this front in the book. But that is to misunderstand the teaching. The Buddha was very active in the world, and he wasn't telling, if you want to become a monk, great, but a lot of his leading disciples were active people in the world, kings. And in his eightfold path, one of the things is right livelihood. So he wasn't saying, remove yourself from the world, don't have a job, et cetera, et cetera. This is about active engagement with the world, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to be great at what you do. It might be useful to look at your motives. But I see nothing wrong with continuing to want to be a great journalist or wanting to do more books, reach more people, et cetera, et cetera. I just try to be aware of like, why am I actually doing this? Is it for self-aggrandizement? Is it for money? Yeah, a little bit. But is it also because I believe in what I'm doing and I enjoy it? Yes, too. So I don't think, just to restate it, both. It is a misconception that if you, my father was very worried that I was going to become ineffective if I became a Buddhist or started meditating. I don't think that's the natural outcome. I think it's a possible pitfall. Thank you.
Can I answer your question? Can I?
Oh, I think you
I do have something.
A thumbs up and a question? All
I have
right.
something to add that didn't come up. You have business people. You have business people now that are meditating. So the question is, what are they meditating for? Are they meditating to increase their profits, to lower their costs? What's the object of their mindfulness? What about if business people were meditating to do no harm in their business practices? What if politicians started meditating and doing likewise, becoming mindful of the effect of their policy on others, and then broadening their sense of identification and compassion for others, not just within their corporation, not just within their group or nation state, but internationally? Then what?
So I'll say what I said before, which is amen. Absolutely, I think there is a danger that, and this is talked about if you pay attention, as I do, to sort of the conversation in the meditation world and the Buddhist world about the popularization of meditation. There's a lot of concern about what's called mindfulness, sort of cheapened, watered down, crass, self-helpy version of mindfulness that is stripped of all of the sort of heart and soul of the tradition from which it's been derived. I have a mixed view on this. I think more mindfulness is better than less mindfulness, so I think it's a great thing that mindfulness has been secularized and is being offered into environments where people would otherwise reflexively reject it. On the other hand, I think that there's something else the Buddha talked about. There's something else that Jesus talked about. There's something else that you talked about in your question, which is compassion. And I view compassion not as a touchy-feely thing or an empty bromide or a sign of weakness. I view it as a competitive advantage. And there's science to back this up. There's science that shows that people who are more compassionate are healthier, more popular, and more successful. And there's science to show that compassion meditation, the specific variety of meditation that is designed to boost your ability to be compassionate, has extraordinary health benefits and behavioral outcomes. Little kids who are taught compassion meditation, preschoolers, are more likely to give their stickers away to kids they don't know. And at the heart of this is a really radical and empowering notion, which is that compassion, which we think of as this kind of like thing that you get, it's like your factory settings. This amount of nice, and that's never going to change. Compassion is in fact a skill that you can develop on the cushion and in your life through various practices. And so I think that my hope is that all the hype that we see about mindfulness right now, that at some point there's a subsequent wave of hype and rah-rah around compassion.
Also thinking in relation to behavior and consequences.
Yeah, well, I think that's a natural outgrowth of these practices, for sure.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I will make this the last question. Thank you.
I just want to say that you outlined your book at the end about acknowledgements about people who say, you changed my mind. And I just want to say, you changed my mind actually through the app. It really changed my life in only a very short amount of time. I just started using it. And I just want to thank you for that, and also curious if, there's about 20 days of content on there. I'm wondering if there's going to be more. Part of what was great about there only being 20 days of content is finding that in that 20 days really meaningful impact, and then now I need to find a path for myself, and that's set me on an amazing journey in and of itself. But I really enjoyed the dailiness of the app and the content needed out in very precise amounts. It was excellent. So I'm just curious, like, what's next?
Well, first of all, thank you. You made my day. That's great. This is really just a new thing, this idea of having an app. And so I'm sure used to being an author and to know, I'm pretty confident in like the book and whatever. But having an app is a new thing for me. And so to hear that it's working is really good. And the good news is that there's a ton more coming. Right now there's 20 days of content. But we're going to flip over to a subscription service and there will be like an infinite amount of content. So right now we have up there a 2-week class with me and Joseph Goldstein. We've just taped a second 2-week class, and then we taped a 2-week class on compassion with Sharon Salzberg, and another 2-week class with a guy named Warren Sofer about how to use mindfulness to improve your communication. And we're going to be doing basically a course a month, and then an enormous amount of audio content. We just raised a bunch of venture capital money, and so this is going to be a major undertaking, and so we need evangelists and users. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dan, I want to thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing questions. Actually, that's what really made the night special. And, this has really been sort of a coming together of different worlds, different traditions. And so with our tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we wanted to offer you a gift. So when you were 15, I guess you realized you like Buddha statues, and now with permanence and actions and consequences, you don't need to steal them. So this is actually the representation of the Bodhisattva of compassion, Chenrezig, in the Tibetan tradition, and all the iconography has more symbolism about the practice of compassion. And so it has been blessed by our spiritual director, Longzo Rinpoche, and it's been filled, and, please,
Thank you very much. This is great. It'll go prominently on my desk. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you.